Greetings and salutations, everybody out there in podcast land. This is the Judo Suey podcast, and I'm your host, Judo Dave Roman. I am so glad to be back behind this microphone. It has been such a long time that I've spoken to you fine people. I really missed it. I really missed you guys. I really missed doing the podcast. I've just had such a busy couple of months ever since the episode I had with Steve Scott. I had intended to do another recording before I moved, but it just didn't happen because something came up with work. It was really bad too. You know, I was all set to do this interview, and I'm talking about podcast interview, and it was going to be the day before I flew out to Baltimore to visit my mother, who I had not seen in a couple of years. So I had a plan set up for the evening, and that morning at work, I'm being told by my boss that I needed to be available to be able to test some software that it was really a very insignificant piece of software, but I didn't understand why there was so much pressure for me, for not only the developer to finish doing the coding on it, but for me to actually do the testing on it. So I had cleared my schedule. I had to cancel that interview because I fully expected to be testing, well into the late hours of the night because I was leaving early that next morning to go to Baltimore. So the work didn't get done, and I basically wasted an evening waiting around for nothing. And that was a Wednesday night. And then I come to find out Friday morning, the company that I worked for laid off a bunch of people, and that included one of the developers that was working on this insignificant project. So I was like, oh, no wonder why there was such a push to get this thing out. This thing for that it just didn't even make sense. It was like, I don't even know how to describe it. Just think of your job and think about the least important part of that job, and then all of a sudden your boss telling you how important that part of the job is and that you must get it done at all costs before you leave for the night. Kind of like one of those things, only to find out later that it really wasn't all that important. They were just trying to cover their rear end. So anyway, enough of that. I am happy to be back behind the microphone to talk all things judo, to talk some things Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, and to talk about whatever it is I want to talk about, because it's been a long time. So I got to bring this up. I have not been talking about pop culture type stuff for a while on the podcast. I decided to phase that out and keep it strictly to judo. But I needed to talk about two things real quick that it's too big and too important for me to just completely ignore, because a lot of you people out there actually liked when I talked about pop culture type stuff. So I'm just going to give it a nod. I'm not going to spend a lot of time with it. First things first, Avengers Endgame. Now, I'm not going to give away any of the movie here, but I just wanted to say that, you know what? After 11 years and 22 movies, this is what you're going to give me? This is a story that you guys decided to go with for Endgame. Look, I liked the movie. Don't get me wrong. If I were to give it on a scale of 1 to 10, I'd give it a solid 7. I don't know if there's any such thing as a liquid 7 or an unsolid 7, but I give it a 7. Some of the special effects and the fight scenes were just over the top phenomenal. But I don't know. The story itself, I can't give it away here because I'm not going to ruin it for people, but for those of you who have seen it, just think of the major plot device in that movie. And my feeling was when I left that theater, I was like, man, that's the direction they went with this. And no, I'm not going to go on YouTube to watch some geek, break down an Endgame in a way that just goes way over the top and tries to explain it with irrational, theories and science and all this kind of stuff. I'm not going to watch those videos. I watched that movie as a spectator, just as a guy that just wants to sit there and enjoy the latest offering. And I left the theater a little disappointed. I gotta say it. I did. It was a good movie, but just not great. And the second thing that I wanted to bring up, of course, Game of Thrones is back. And as of this recording, there's only 2 more episodes remaining. And again, for me, it's been a good season. It hasn't been a great season in my opinion. I mean, there was that one scene where a Starbucks coffee cup was on the table after they won their big battle. That was hilarious. That was awesome. But yeah, I'll be curious to see how they wrap everything up in 2 episodes. It seems like every episode this season has been the length of a short movie, about an hour and 20 minutes long, and it's been good TV, don't get me wrong, but I don't know. I'm still waiting for that one scene where you had that sense of satisfaction, like for example when Jon Snow finally killed what was his name? Ramsay Bolton, that's right. When Jon Snow killed Ramsay Bolton. Now, look, if I just spoiled it for you, well, too bad. That happened a couple of years ago. So when Jon Snow killed Ramsay Bolton, there was a sense of satisfaction, and I'm still kind of waiting for that. I feel like this show is going to end with a not so happily ever after. That's just going to be my guess. I'll be curious to hear this a couple weeks from now when I finally see the last episode. So that's it for the pop culture stuff. Something I wanted to bring up as well. Over the past couple of months, or really 6 weeks or so, I've been in the process of a big move. I have finally made it to my new home, the new home of Judo Chop Suey World Headquarters. But I wanted to make note that I am still trying to fine-tune the acoustics of this room. My setup right now is really great. If you follow me on Instagram, I got a picture of it. But it's not ideal for acoustics just yet. I've got a setup that I feel that I need to improve on, just the way that this room is. It's my man cave. It's where I play my video games. It's where I play guitar. It's where I do my recording. And I love it up here. This house is amazing. It's got a view of a lake. I get to see some snapping turtles and some ducks fly around and poop in my yard. I mean, what more can I ask for? So it's a great house. I'm really glad to be here. I'm really glad to be out of that other house, which was just, for me personally, on a daily basis, the commute was a nightmare. And I've shaved off about 40 minutes off of my commute. So I'm very, very happy about that. But I do acknowledge that the acoustics on this podcast, on this episode, is not as ideal as I would like it to be. I don't strive for perfection because I'm too cheap to spend that kind of money and be in a professional recording studio. But at least over the past year or so, I managed to fine-tune the acoustics in my other room, which was really my son's room, and I always was pleased with the quality of the audio of the podcast. It's going to take me a little while to get it just right here, but please stand by. I'm doing the best that I can with the amount of time and resources that I have. But that doesn't take away from the content of this hideous podcast, so hopefully you guys will enjoy it. Now that reminds me, before I get into the judo-related news and stuff, I wanted to announce that I was a guest on another podcast called the More Than Ordinary Podcast, which is hosted by Dr. Anne-Maria DeMars. It was probably the first time I have ever been a guest on somebody else's podcast. Actually, I know that's the first time. And I had a really good time. It was an enjoyable conversation. We were probably talking for about an hour or so. I'm not sure how much of that actual conversation she's going to put on the episode. Probably maybe 2 minutes where I talk about my podcast and what I do, and then that she cuts it short. So I don't know yet. But it was a great conversation. And we touched on a variety of topics. We touched on the current state of judo in the United States. We talked about JudoCon, the one that was last year in November, and the one upcoming in California. We also talked about a little bit about how I do recording and how I find time to record and stuff, and my process on how I do a lot of editing and things like that. So, Anne-Maria, if you're listening to this, everything you heard up to this point, before I started talking about your podcast, I recorded like a week ago. So it's kind of like this is how I talked about when I piecemeal things. This is one of those examples. So it's, if you want to call it a time warp or something like that, going back and forth between time and things like that. It's just a jump to the left. You put your hands on your hips. Yeah, and just for the record, the time warp is probably the only dance that I can do and not screw up. I can't even do the Humpty dance properly. Oh my God. Anybody remember that? Yeah, I'm really dating myself, so Gosh, I haven't seen Rocky Horror in a very, very long time. It's been, got to be at least 10 years. You know, the other day I was watching The Warriors because I was bored and I had nothing to do, and the wife and kids were upstairs in my man cave, so I kind of felt I had to get away from everybody. So I decided to go in my bedroom and watch The Warriors again. I haven't seen that movie in like at least 20, 25 years or so. It's a good movie. I forgot how good it was. It was pretty cool. Anyway, that's enough of the time warp. I'm going to fade this thing out and continue on with this podcast. Only on the Judo Chop Suey podcast can I combine talk about judo and the Rocky Horror Picture Show. So there you go. Now, on this episode of the Judo Chop Suey podcast, I quite haven't decided what I'm going to talk about, but I'm going to wing it. I know I'm definitely going to cover some judo news that I've wanted to cover over the past couple of months. Big news coming out of Brazil. As of the time of this recording, the Baku Grand Slam is going to be coming up. I will probably review that on this episode, but as you guys know, I piecemeal episodes, I piecemeal segments, so I may get to a formal review at the end, and if I don't, I'm just going to delete this entire section. You'll never hear it. I'm also going to talk about this really horrendous story that I read on Reddit, on the judo subreddit, and I'm going to springboard that into another discussion on how I think judo is not doing a good enough job in the United States when it comes to reaching out to adults and adult beginning students. I think, once again, this story is just one story in a myriad of stories that I could tell you and share with you about how in some clubs, in some places, adults are treated like second-class citizens. And I don't like it, and I think you're going to, at least some of you are going to appreciate my point of view, maybe not, but it's something that I want to talk about, and yeah, really a terrible story. So before I get into any of all that, ladies and gentlemen, I've got breaking news. So there's something that I want to read on the IJF website that I was just made aware of a few hours ago, and the headline says, "Historic agreement reached by IJF and Iran." Let's see, the article states, after having witnessed on several occasions of recent history a disturbing phenomenon, which involves the sudden quote-unquote injury or failure of weigh-in of Iranian athletes, phenomenon which is linked by many observers to the possible obligation of the given athletes to compete against certain countries, namely Israel. The International Judo Federation decided to step up in order to protect the rights of athletes to fair competition. So at the moment, as I'm reading this isn't exactly an article per se, but I'm going to read as much as I can read here. What the article says: the following several exchanges and discussions with the Iranian Sports Ministry, Olympic Committee, and Judo Federation, the IJF is pleased to announce that it received a favorable response. Pardon for my voice crack there. A favorable response and commitment from the Iranian side. For reference, please find the attached letter. Now, the attached letter is from, let's see, it's the National Olympic Committee of the Islamic Republic of Iran. Let's see, addressed to Dr. Marius Weiser, President of International Judo Federation, says, "Dear President, we would like to acknowledge with thanks the receipt of your comprehensive letter dated May 2nd and wish to express my sincere gratitude for the positive attitude you have toward the Iran Judo and the newly elected NF president." I'm guessing that's National Federation president. "Please rest assured that your considerations are also our concerns and our mutual interests, as discussed during our recent meeting in, let's see if I get this right, Fujiwara, and as brought to the kind attention of the IOC president, Dr. Thomas Bach, in New York and Lausanne." I'm not sure what that is. "We would like to restate that our NOC has worked hard in cooperation with the Ministry of Sport and Youth in the years to improve the implementation of good governance and the Olympic movement principles among Iranian sports community. And judo is one of those sports which is now in good standing in terms of institutional and competitive stability, with notably increasing popularity among the young Iranian generation. Iran Judo has found its growing route toward a quite bright future in a national and international levels in the direction of the objectives and ideals of the International Judo Federation. I agree. Iran is getting pretty strong. Continuing on, we deeply believe that this end could be accomplished by mutual understanding and patience. By means of this letter, we would like to confirm that the IR Iran NOC shall fully respect the Olympic Charter and its non-discrimination principle, and the IR Iran Judo Federation shall fully comply with the Olympic Charter and the IJF statutes. In the meantime, in collaboration with the IR Iran Ministry of Sports and Youth, we are sparing no efforts in negotiating with the parliament so that we could identify the proper legal resolutions. Thank you very much for your support. Now, I know I haven't touched on this issue in a while, in certainly a couple of podcasts, because my last 2 episodes were interview episodes, and the episode before that, I believe it was when I co-hosted with Judo Joe. I know it's been a while since I've released a new episode. So here's a story in case you've forgotten. So it has not gone unnoticed by myself and others that Iranian athletes have been avoiding competition against Israeli athletes. And this was fully on display with current world champion in the under 81 kilo division, Saeed Molai, who is just a fantastic judoka. He lost several months ago a match, and it looked like he deliberately lost that match because he was on a collision course to compete against Sagi Muki of Israel. And this is not the first time that Saeed Molai and other Iranian athletes have done this, have basically taken the fall to avoid competing against an Israeli. And look, I mean, I think that's ridiculous. And I'm sorry, I don't want to hear about any anti-Israeli rhetoric either, because look, all countries, or there are many countries out there that have issues with other countries, and we don't see this happening with other countries. And I don't want to hear any emails or comments about how this happens all the time and yada, yada, yada. There is an anti-Israeli bias. We've seen it with Iranian athletes. We have seen it with Abu Dhabi, the Abu Dhabi Grand Slam, and their refusal to play Israel's national anthem. I just think that's BS. And that spirit of discrimination is against the ideals and principles of judo and the IJF charter. It just is, and it's unacceptable. But all of that being said, I gotta hand it to Marius Weiser here, because for all the crap that he gets from a lot of people out there about the judo rules and stuff, which, by the way, just as a reminder, you know, those rule changes about leg grabs and stuff, those decisions are made by a committee of people, and they are made by a committee of people whose names would probably surprise you. But of course, as the face of the International Judo Federation, he's the one that takes the brunt of the criticism. But I gotta say, as a diplomat, he is fantastic. And he has to navigate issues that are not easy to navigate, you know, when it comes to ensuring that Israel's national anthem is played in all venues that the International Judo Federation World Tour competes in, namely Abu Dhabi. And then, of course, dealing, you know, the challenge of dealing with Iran, the challenge of dealing with North Korea, and striving to get a unified Korea competing on the same mat, which in of itself is historic. And look, I'll be the first to say there's a lot that the IJF I don't agree with in what they do. There's a lot that I think they get wrong when it comes to judo and its growth. But there's a lot that they get right. And this was a critical issue that they have to get done. Because think of it this way, and I know I brought this up before, and I got to give credit where credit is due. I had heard this initially, which it's a valid concern. You know, listening to the original judo podcast months ago, they had come up with expressed concerns of a possible scenario that could actually happen in the Olympics. So, for example, their example was, well, what if Saeed Molai of Iran and Sagi Muki of Israel end up in the under 81 kilo finals for the gold medal match at the Olympics next year? I mean, the way things were going, we may not have an under 81 kilo gold medal match if that were to happen. And if that happened, judo would make worldwide news for all of the wrong reasons. And we certainly don't want to see that on the biggest stage of sports. So once again, kudos to the IJF for getting this situation handled for the time being. And look, to be perfectly clear, I do not blame the Iranian athletes. I don't think it's their fault. I don't think they're making these decisions on their own. And I'd be willing to bet that Saeed Molai probably has no issue competing against Sagi Muki or any Israeli. But unfortunately for him, in some of these countries out there, maybe not necessarily Iran, but or maybe it is. I mean, could his family be in jeopardy if he decides to compete against an Israeli? I mean, could his life be in jeopardy if he decides to compete against an Israeli? I mean, we all know the opposite wouldn't happen. No Israeli is going to get his life threatened for competing against a Saudi or competing against an Iranian or any other country in the Middle East that has a political issue with Israel. So we all know the opposite's not true. So just to be clear, we all know, given the reaction of Saeed Molai in his last loss he didn't decide. In his last loss, he was very, very upset for having to take a dive to avoid fighting an Israeli. He was visibly upset in that match. So we all know that it's not him making this decision. He's not out there making a political stand against Israel. This is coming from higher up. And is likely very serious ramifications if he were to fight an Israeli. So again, this is very explosive and dangerous political waters that the IJF and Marius Visor have had to navigate through, and it looks like they've been successful in doing so. So again, congratulations to everybody involved, and credit to the president of the Iranian Judo Federation for working with various government officials to get this letter sent and to get this commitment. It's good for Iran, it's good for Israel, it's good for the International Judo Federation, and this is the only result that would have been acceptable. All right, now moving along, I want to talk about another news item that's no longer breaking news, but it's still a big deal. So about a month ago, it was announced that Brazil was awarded a Grand Slam. Brasilia 2019, a Grand Slam event that's going to be taking place, taking place on October 6th through the 8th. This is tremendous news, and I'm very happy to see that Brazil, a powerhouse country for competitive judo, is getting a Grand Slam. And my goodness, they deserve it. Now, I read this story on the IJF site about a month ago. It says the Brazilian Judo Confederation, which last hosted the 2013 World Championships in Rio de Janeiro, has a long and storied tradition in the sport as one of judo's leading nations and are celebrating their 50th anniversary this year. Brazil hosted the fourth edition of the World Judo Championships in 1965 and held subsequent editions in 2007 and 2013 in the same city. The South American nation also staged a Grand Slam in Rio from 2009 to 2012 and the World Team Championships in Salvador de Bahia in 2012. Brasilia will join Paris, Dusseldorf, Ekaterinburg, Baku, Abu Dhabi, and Osaka as Grand Slam host cities as the IGF reaches a record of 7 Grand Slam events for 2019. Boy, this calendar is really full, and I know that later on this summer we're going to have the Grand Prix up in Montreal, in I think it's going to be in July, and we also have the Cancun Grand Prix. So now we've got 3 World Tour events on this side of the world, and by this side of the world, I'm talking about, the Western Hemisphere. So I don't know how much of an advantage this is for countries in on this side of the world. I would imagine the transportation and travel is easier, albeit not maybe necessarily cheaper, because I was kind of looking at flights. How much would it cost for me to go to Rio? It's pretty expensive. It's not really that much cheaper than flying to Japan or flying to other cities. But I would venture to guess that being within an hour of the same time zone is important, so or helpful. So this side of the world needs it, and this is great for Team USA and for Team Canada and for Brazil and other countries on Cuba and Puerto Rico and Mexico and so many other countries on this side of the world that they don't have to travel 13, 15, 17 hours to these tournaments across the ocean. And they've got one practically right in their backyard. And Brazil certainly deserves it. As the article stated, they've been a powerhouse for many years and so strong that I wish that Team USA would get together with the CBJ and figure out what they're doing right and copy what they're doing and do that in the United States, because I mean Brazil's got it figured out because they have the same challenges in terms of travel, probably in terms of costs. So maybe Brazil's the Brazilian team is funded a lot better than Team USA by the government. I don't know. I'm not going to pretend to know, but even apart from all of that, Brazil has it figured out on how to win on the highest levels of competitive judo. And for some reason at this moment, seems like the golden era for Team USA is over and done with. And unfortunately, given how the Cadets has been performing recently, unfortunately doesn't look like that's going to be changing anytime soon. I want to talk about a story that I read on Reddit a couple of weeks ago, and the reason why I want to bring this up touches on an issue with judo that I have observed in the United States. And this is going to be me rehashing an old take, an old opinion of mine. Maybe my opinions have changed a little bit, but this is going to be one of those subjects where I have just it really frustrates me when I hear one of these stories. And this is something that I read on the Judo subreddit, which is a discussion forum for all things judo, and it's probably the most popular and largest English-based judo discussion forum on the internet. I would have to believe it's got about 20,000 subscribers, and these subscribers represent judoka and enthusiasts from all over the world, but largely the United States and certainly some in the UK and Australia and some in other countries where English is not the primary language, but some of those guys use the forum as a means to improve upon their English, at least written English, and we all have a great discussion most of the time. As of late, some of the posts have been a little bit out of hand when it comes to stupid memes and reposts. Like, for example, I'm sure many of you guys have seen that video of the machete attack, and the guy does a perfect Seyanagi after when the assailant attacks the police officer with a machete. It turns out that was just a drill that didn't happen in real life, but that video seemingly got posted at least 10 times within the first week. So we get a lot of that, but we also get much more solid judo discussion, and it's a great place that I hang out. I always check it every day. Sometimes I contribute, not as much as I have in the past, but I do. And I tend to get my posts tend to get downvoted quite a bit because I don't really sugarcoat things when when I post or respond to certain questions and things like that. But that's okay. I'm speaking honestly, just like I always do on this podcast. So, moving on to the story, I want to read this story and then really express my disgust at this, because this is I won't go as far as saying it's a common story, but I think the prevailing attitudes and maybe some ignorance out there when it comes to judo instructors and certain sensei is really breathtaking to me. So I'm going to go ahead and read the story, and then I want to comment on this afterwards. So here's the subject of the post that I saw on Reddit. Went to first judo class and my knee is destroyed. Been going to BJJ for a little over a year, no problems or major injuries. Decided to check out my small local judo club. While doing speed drills, we weren't doing full fit-ins. My partner, who was a yellow belt, he was a lefty and I was a righty. He did his 10 fit-ins, which he doesn't know what that is. In judo, it's called uchikomi. So they were doing 10 fit-ins for Osotogari, not touching my left leg. On number 10 or 11, he wraps his leg around my knee, kind of like a reap around the upper knee, and hooks around the calf. Then he applies pressure sideways, and boom, I collapsed. I just sat on the floor with my eyes closed, wondering why did I even walk in the door. I started to feel like it was done purposely because I wore my only gi, which has my BJJ school patches on it. I asked before class if it was okay to wear it because I didn't want to be disrespectful. Sat out a bit after the collapse, but came back and took some throws on the crash pad. Instructor asked me to try an Osotogari on him, and when I went to sweep with my right leg and stand on the left leg, I collapsed again. I'm just ranting right now because I don't know what to feel. I feel like I have a major injury to my knee, and I pray it wasn't purposely done because I showed complete respect to everyone there. Just an overall bad night. I wish I just would have stayed home. Now, in a follow-up post, 3 weeks later, it turns out that he found out that he's got an ACL tear, a complex meniscus tear, an MCL level 1 sprain, and a fracture above and below the knee. Now, here is why this story really bothers me. And to be clear, I confirm that this is a club in the United States. Yes, I know the United States is a pretty big place, but there aren't a whole heck of a lot of judo clubs out there. He declined to reveal what club this was at, and that's fine, and I understand that. But whoever the sensei is of this club, shame on you. I mean, you cannot. No instructor should allow beginners to work with each other because beginners just don't know any better. And this fellow, from what I gathered, just briefly looking at his profile, he's somebody in his mid-30s, and it wouldn't shock me or surprise me at all that the person he was working with was probably a guy in his late 20s or early 30s, just another adult, another beginner, and that's fine. Look, every black belt in judo was a beginner at one point, and many of them were beginners as adults, myself included. And I have seen this happen. Not so much the injury, but beginners being paired up with other beginners. And I just think that is completely inexcusable. That should never happen, especially to somebody who this was their first day. And you're going to put that guy with a yellow belt that doesn't know. I mean, a yellow belt knows nothing. They're just a white belt with that just been around a little while. They don't have good judo. I mean, it's unbelievable to me that you're gonna put a first day judoka, a first day visitor with a yellow belt practicing Osotogari left versus right. I mean, somebody should have stepped in there. When I run judo classes, which isn't very often, I make sure I pair advanced students with beginner students, because advanced students, they're not going to allow beginner students to do something on them where they're going to risk their own injury. And an advanced student is not going to do uchikome or nagekome on beginners in a way that is going to injure them. But a yellow belt is not going to know any different. And I mean, the bottom line is that judo instructors and sensei out there, they have to protect their adult students, and they can't treat them like disposable people that oh man, it sucks that you got injured. Oh well, we'll just keep doing class and whatever. And look, I get it that injuries happen in judo, but what happened in this story is negligent at best, and just downright ignorant and disrespectful at worst. You just can't put beginners with each other and allow them to go. And I don't like beginners, people that really don't know what they're doing, even doing randori. And the thing is, what upsets me the most is because I was once the guy that caused injuries. If you can believe that, little old 5'7", 145-pound me, I was a guy that caused injuries to other people. Because when I started I was 31 years old, but I had the fitness level and certainly energy and athleticism of somebody who was 21 when I started. So I was bouncing all over the place. I was relentless in my pursuit in learning judo. And when I was younger, I wouldn't go as far as saying that I didn't care, but your safety was not on the forefront of my mind. What was on the forefront of my mind was learning judo, being the best that I can be, and trying to improve as quickly as possible so I could get more rank. Because when I first started, that's all I really cared about. I wanted to get to the next rank and the next rank, and there's nothing wrong with that, with having goals, but I was just so single-minded and focused in that way that I was a terror out there. I mean, and none of the sensei at that club really did anything to curtail that. And conversely, I got paired with people that if it was my club, I would have never paired them with that. I'm pretty sure I've told this story before. The very first time I practiced Nage no Kata, we were working on Kata Guruma, and this was like my 5th class, and I got paired with somebody that was 6'4" and 250 pounds. I mean, who does that? It's like they didn't care because, well, he's just an adult. He might not stick around. We'll just have him work with this guy. It doesn't matter. He's not going to get it. So, we'll worry about everybody else that's more advanced preparing for their belt test. I mean, that's pretty much what it was, because in hindsight, that's what it was, because when I was there at the time, that's exactly how I felt. Like it didn't matter. And I feel like when instructors and sensei out there, when they pair beginners with each other in this way, to me, it's telling them, well, you don't matter. Because I've got other students that are younger, that are preparing for competitions, that need to work on this stuff, and they need to work with each other. So we'll just have you guys just pair up, and you guys can go off in the corner, and you do your little uchikomi, and you do your little fit-ins, and it doesn't matter what you guys look like because I'm more focused on other things. That's what that tells me when I hear an instructor pairing beginners with other beginners. And look, maybe that's not the case with everybody. Granted, the author of this post said that it was a small judo club. But you know what? That's exactly why judo clubs remain small, especially when it comes to adult classes. Because as a whole, adults don't matter in judo. Now look, I know I'm making a bunch of blanket statements here and I'm painting with a broad brush. I know it's not this way everywhere at every club. I mean, heck, I think AAU Judo does a fantastic job with adults and growing grassroots judo through adults, because the truth of the matter is that an adult that starts judo and sticks with it is far more likely to learn all of judo and far more likely to become downright holders than a kid that starts out at 9 years old. You know, the kid might stick with it through till he's through high school, and then he eventually quits. Some of them make it to EQ and others may make it to Shodan, but after that, a lot of times they quit and drop out because, well, they're not competing, because all it was competition. But for an adult that starts out, they compete, they desire to learn kata, they desire to learn the history of judo. An adult that starts judo, it's far more likely to stick with it for the rest of their lives. And the problem to me is that judo as a whole does not try to target adults and grow that segment of the population. And unfortunately, because of that, judo has a stigma with just common people out there. It's like taekwondo. It's like, have you ever met a person that started taekwondo as an adult? I never have. And judo tends to have the same stigma out there, whether that's fair or unfair. That's just the way it is. And at least in the United States, and conversely with Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, it's quite the opposite. It's not sport focused. Of course, there's an avenue for that, just like there's an avenue for competitive Monopoly players. There's an avenue for sport. But, for the most part in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, in my experience in the various clubs that I've been in, and certainly the club that I'm a part of, it's competing is not like the driving thing that of course they teach the rules, but my instructors, they bring up jiu-jitsu tournaments that are coming up, and they make the encouragement that people should compete if you want to compete and this and that, but it's not. There is not this underlying feeling that in order to be a relevant and important member of the club that you need to compete. Now, people that compete tend to get promoted faster as it should be in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, and I think it should be that way in Judo, but there are avenues where you don't necessarily have to compete. Once I get over this groin injury, I want to compete in a Jiu-Jitsu tournament this year, but I may have to do that with this groin injury because this damn thing is not going away. But the way that jiu-jitsu classes are being run at my club and at other clubs that I have visited over the past, 20 years, they're doing something right, and it shows in their numbers. And it's not just a matter of taking falls. And I think with judo, when it comes to adults, that the teaching, that lessons really should happen from the ground up. I really think it should be a ground up approach to teaching judo. And I can't remember who I was telling this to a couple of weeks ago, but this is going to sound like one of my crazy opinions here, but sometimes in judo, I don't really think a lifelong judo instructor may necessarily be the best person to teach ukemi to a beginner adult, because for that guy, doing ukemi is like, it's as challenging as touching your nose with your fingertips. It's nothing. It's not even a second thought. And that's how I'm at, of course, right now after doing judo for so long. But in the beginning, doing ukemi was a frightening thing, and it's that way for most adults. And I think the best person to teach an adult ukemi is somebody that started judo as an adult, because they absolutely know how terrifying it can be to roll over your front shoulder and slap the mat, because for our entire lives before you walk through that dojo, you've done everything in your life to avoid hitting the ground, and now we're asking you to voluntarily hit the ground. That's a scary proposition. And another thing, and somebody had asked me a question on my Facebook Messenger, and he had asked my opinion on attracting and retaining adult students, and like I just said, I really think teaching judo from the ground up would be a good way to start, and certainly not making judo a risky proposition as soon as you walk through that door would be an excellent place to start. And by doing that, don't pair up beginners with other beginners. I mean, it's just so freaking ignorant to me. Now, the fellow that wrote me also does Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu and has been doing Jiu-Jitsu for a while, and he was telling me about he had visited, I think it was the 2-year anniversary of his club, and he was talking about the sense of camaraderie that he feels at his jiu-jitsu club that is not quite the same in his judo club. And I thought it was an interesting observation, because that is one that I have also noticed myself, that, and again, guys, I'm not bashing judo. I'm not bashing instructors here, but I'm just talking about my personal experiences with judo in the United States, in my local area. But I gotta say that, that sense of camaraderie that I certainly feel at my jiu-jitsu club, Ybor City Jiu-Jitsu, it's not really there at just about any of the judo clubs I've ever been a part at. Now, the club that I spent the most amount of time with, a lot of times it was just me and my instructor, Sensei Dave Middendorf, who has since passed. It was just me and him training. So Dave and I developed a very strong bond, and I loved him like a brother. I miss him every day. But we had a very small club. Sometimes some students would come every once in a while, but for the most part, it was me and Dave, and sometimes his daughter, and sometimes his son, and that's what it was. So Dave and I developed a close bond, mainly because we were just around each other all the time, But in other judo clubs that I've been a part at, it's it's not quite the same. It's not the same as it is in jiu-jitsu. And my crappy theory is that, I think when you do a lot of newaza or you're rolling on the ground and you are constantly being choked out, constantly being armbarred or leg locked, and you're constantly tapping, you develop a sense of trust and bonds that is very unique to Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, in my opinion. I've not experienced those kind of bonds at a judo club, and I don't think you can develop those kind of bonds in the same way just through nagekomi and randori. And look, I know injuries happen in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. I get that. And they probably happen for adults far more often in judo. But, in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, or just rolling on the ground, newaza, whatever you want to call it, if something isn't right or you're not sure of what's happening or something hurts, you just tap and the person's going to let go. And when you do that repeatedly, you're going to develop bonds of trust. I mean, we are constantly doing things in class where we are putting our lives in other people's hands. And, if you tap out like a smart person, you're going to be safe. Now, you really can't say the same in judo because there's so many, it's so dynamic and there's so many variables that can happen like this, like the story that I read, that poor fellow just doing, 10 uchikomi, and on the 11th one, he gets a torn ACL and MCL and a fractured knee. I mean, I suppose if you were to take every single judoka around the world, knee injuries are fairly rare, but I'm sure that is far more common among adults. And, when it comes to throws, it's hard to gain another adult's trust that you're not going to hurt them badly when you throw them. But the thing is that unlike on the ground, if an adult doesn't have good body control while they're being thrown, they can still get injured, and it's not the fault of the person doing the throwing. And at my jiu-jitsu club, there's been some adults, some older guys, one or two even older than me, that have expressed interest in doing judo, but they are concerned about the falls. And I tell them, look, if you come to the class, just work with me. I will not have you work with other beginners. And in fact, if we do randori, you're going to be the one throwing me. I'm not going to be the one throwing you, because, I remember having this conversation. I told him, look, I've done enough throwing in my life that I absolutely have nothing to gain by chucking you around for 5 minutes in randori. Nothing to gain. And if there's one thing I do really well in judo, is that I'm a very good uke. I'm very proud of that fact, by the way. And I also remember, when James Wall was on the podcast a couple of episodes ago, he talked about, beginners, that you got to treat them like a little golden nugget that you got to polish and treat with absolute care. And they're fragile little things that you have to really take care of. And I think that approach when it comes to adults, regardless of their age, is the correct approach. And I think building from the ground up is the correct approach. Even if you're a jiu-jitsu guy, if you're a purple belt, brown belt, black belt, start them off on the ground in judo. Show them, you're not going to have to teach them, Keisagatami or Yoko Shiogatami or something like that. But maybe you can teach them, hey, this is what the rules of judo allow you to do and what you're not allowed to do, and we'll work from there. And well, I suppose somebody that's a purple belt and up is going to have some competition experience, so they would have at least practiced some ukemi. But a first day jiu-jitsu guy coming into judo, it should be about ukemi. It should be about showing them what we do in judo and building a sense of familiarity with it. But you like I was talking before, you can't build those bonds of trust if you treat adults like they're disposable. And I just think that is a common problem. I said that is not everywhere, certainly not with AAU judo. Everything that Steve Scott is doing, everything that James Wall is doing, and everybody associated with AAU judo and cares about grassroots judo, I'm not talking about them. I hope for you guys that listen, I hope I'm not talking about you. But judo as a whole needs to develop a prevailing attitude that judo is for adults and that it's not a kid's sport like taekwondo is. And again, to be clear, I know this show is heard internationally, so I don't know what the prevailing attitudes are like in judo in other countries, but in the United States, it just seems like the adults don't matter. And that's my experience. That's been my observation, and I think that's a shame. All right, well, look, moving along. I know I spent a lot of time on this, but I tell you what, that story really, really bugged me. And the worst part is that he'll probably never, ever step into a judo dojo again. All right, well, I don't think I'm going to get to covering the Baku Grand Slam like I would have liked to. That would probably take another 20 minutes, and I think I've bored you guys long enough with my ranting and raving about all things judo. But I will cover at some point so this is what I'm going to do in the next. Now that I have my own recording space, I am really going to shoot for doing an episode once every 2 weeks. I want to get back to that, and I regret not being able to do that for you all. Gosh, we're going on 6 weeks already without an episode, and that's not what I intended to do. This isn't one of those slow fades into obscurity. I really don't want that to happen. It's just my life has been incredibly busy over the past 2 years or so. Really, just the commuting and everything with my job and where I was living. But now that's so much more improved. Got my own space, so it's going to be a lot easier for me to do recording here and there. And I am looking forward to getting back to a regular schedule. As a matter of fact, once I wrap this up today, I'm going to start preparing for my next episode. So we are going to get back to an every 2 week cycle, even if some of the episodes are shorter than others. And I think that's okay with you guys. So coming up on the next episode for sure, I will be discussing the Hohok Grand Prix. And that's a good reminder for me because I have an account with fantasyjudo.com, and I haven't played that game in a while because I've just been so darn busy. But that reminds me, I got to set my lineups on Fantasy Judo. If you guys haven't taken a look at that, I highly suggest that you do. It's a fun way to, there's no money involved, but it's a fun way to get involved with creating a Fantasy Judo team for whatever competition you want to take part of. And when you do these kind of fantasy sports types things, you tend to have a more vested interest into the event of what's going on. So I'm gonna definitely set up a lineup sometime today because as of this recording, there's only 4 more days till the Hohok Grand Prix. So I'm gonna get my lineup set in unless there's surprise withdrawals. I believe that everybody that is going to be at that competition or said that's going to be there will be there, maybe with the exception of Teddy Renier. Now, I don't think he said that he's going to be at the Hohok Grand Prix, but I tell you what, he said he's going to be here, he said he's going to be there, and then it's seemingly at the last minute, he just ends up withdrawing from the competition. And again, I know I mentioned this earlier, certainly in previous episodes. I don't know what his deal is. I have to believe he's got to compete at some point because he's currently ranked number 34 in his weight division, which we all know, somebody that's whatever he is, 137-0, on the IJF World Tour, we all know he's much better than ranked number 34. But I tell you what, at some point he's got to compete. Doesn't he need the points for the Olympics? I would think so. And I don't know if he just assumes that if he shows up, he's going to win at every competition. But, rust is a real thing, and I don't know what his long-term plan is, but he's got to do something. He's got to show up somewhere, and I know he's not showing up for the World Championships this year. Now, when I saw him do Randori earlier, this was several months ago, he looked pretty good. He certainly didn't look moving around as heavy as I would have guessed he'd look. But again, it was just Randori. And I would love to know what his long-term plan is leading up to the Olympics because I don't know, you got to get out there. I've said it before. I would think, So anyway, if I fully expect for Teddy Riner to not be at the Hohok Grand Prix, but plenty of people are, and I'm going to set my lineup later on today. And again, I encourage you guys to visit fantasyjudo.com if you want to take part in it as well. And just as a reminder, there is a hyphen between the fantasy, so it's fantasy-judo.com, because if you go to fantasyjudo.com, you end up on some site that's not safe for work. You can't blame me. I've already warned you. All right, I'm going to blow this popsicle stand. I think it's time for me to wrap things up. I really appreciate it if you made it this far. I thank you once again. I thank you for being, for many of you out there, being loyal listeners of the Judo Chop Suey podcast. You've certainly done your part. Now it's time for me to do mine and present this podcast with a level of consistency that you all deserve. I really appreciate all the kind words, the email, the follows, the likes. If you want to follow me on Instagram, you could do that at La Vida Judoka. My Instagram is awesome. You can also email the show at judochopsueyshow@gmail.com. That is the best way to get a hold of me. I've mentioned it many times. Shooting me a message on Instagram is the absolute worst way to get a hold of me, especially if you don't follow me. Because if you don't follow me on Instagram, you shoot me a message on Instagram, it sits in that queue for a long time, and I recently responded to a fellow. Oddly enough, I was talking about this earlier, saying, have you ever heard of an adult that starts Taekwondo? Well, I ended up getting a message from a guy that actually did that, and he had the same type of complaints about Taekwondo as I've been talking about with regards to judo and adults, that it's primarily viewed as a kid's sport, and when you go to local competitions, he may only have one or two other people to compete with. So, that kind of goes back to my other point. But anyway, it would happen to be an adult that did Taekwondo started it as an adult, or maybe restarted it. But still, just kind of interesting how, as I was talking about that, turns out I get the one message in my queue, days later after I talk about that subject about a guy, and I didn't even release this yet. So there, I've already been proven wrong. You can follow the show on Facebook. Just search for Judo Chop Suey Show or Judo Chop Suey Podcast. I'm not sure. And if you're brave enough, you can go ahead and friend request me on Instagram. You can do that, but you can also friend request me on Facebook. I will accept it. Just make sure, if we don't have mutual friends, just shoot me a message and say, hey, I listened to you on the podcast. Because if you don't, I will not accept the friend request, because I get a lot of friend requests from people that I don't know, probably Russian bots or things like that. No offense to Russia or anything. Russians are great people. I've known a few in my life, but unfortunately, Mother Russia has a bad reputation when it comes to fakes and bots and stuff like that. At my work, we've got this application that's up, and it shows. I don't know why we have it up, but it's up on a huge TV. It shows all the attempts at hacking and stuff going on around the world. And the funny thing is that we all talk about Russian bots and trolls and hackers and things like that. But when I look at this map of the world on the TV, it looks like War Games. Have you ever seen that movie from like 1984? It looks like War Games in a sense that you see Russia and the USA constantly attacking each other in other countries. It's kind of cool. I can't remember the name of the site. If I remember, maybe I'll put it in the show notes. Which, by the way, if you've gotten this far, you probably already ignored the show notes. But maybe, in the future, I got to remind you guys, read the show notes, because if you want to skip around to different subjects and topics and things like that, very important. If you're a new listener, if you made it this far, and you're saying to yourself, gosh, I wish he had show notes. Well, I do have show notes, and just wherever you listen to this podcast, I will always put in detailed show notes about the timestamps on when I'm talking about what. And that way, if you just want to hear the beginning and the end and just skip all the good stuff or me ranting and raving, you can do that. So with that, I'm going to end things here. I hope you all have a great day. I hope you all have a great rest of the week. Train hard. Stay safe out there. And until next time, I'm out.
Oppan Gangnam Style. Gangnam Style. Oppan Gangnam Style. Gangnam Style.